Kia ora crew, just want to welcome you to our first episode of the Ingredient Insights series. Very exciting. Hope you enjoyed that thumbnail. It was a bit of good fun. That's actually from an old Ritalin ad from about the 70s or 80s. That old lady is meant to be looking happy. Yeah, that's an interesting view on what happy looks like, I'd say. But on to L-Dopa. We're going to be talking through what L-Dopa is and its general background, and then moving on to why many people supplement with it, or where it may help, emphasis on the may, and then also working down into the two main metabolic pathways, and how those metabolic pathways kind of come in, and as we go from that journey of oral consumption, and then finally to where we want it in the brain. So probably just to dive in to our background right now, we'll just a thought of L-Dopa. It is a large neutral amino acid that is part of a family. You may have heard of some of the others like L-tyrosine or leucine, but a key thing about L-Dopa is that you don't usually consume it in your diet. There is some plants that you will get it in, say for example mucuna, but we usually synthesize it naturally from L-tyrosine in our brain. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But looking at why it's useful to supplement with is really because it's a precursor to your dopamine and other catecholamines, the adrenaline and noradrenaline, aka epinephrine and norepinephrine. Benefits of dopamine as our primary direct precursor to it, as L-Dopa is the direct precursor to dopamine, is that dopamine does help with your mood, it helps with reward-centered motivation, and it also helps with motor control function. And so that's really critical in the case of Parkinson's patients, which lose that motor control because of dopamine-related cell death, as in their cells that create the dopamine, they aren't functioning anymore. So they actually supplement quite a lot of L-Dopa. But a key overall in the supplement industry is that L-Dopa is often used in high stimulant stacks or anti-stress stacks, and that's because dopamine is generally used up a lot more under stress, like when you are in stressful conditions. And it is one that does help with that motivation. At least in the theory, I haven't actually supplemented L-Dopa directly myself as a standalone, so it's definitely one I will be looking more in the future. So just before we move on there, we'll highlight those points. L-Dopa is mainly used because it is the precursor to dopamine. We want to increase dopamine levels in our brain, and that is particularly useful in the case of Parkinson's patients because they're quite deficient in dopamine levels and they need it for motor function. And for the rest of us, they're using it, and we're generally healthy and we're using it in supplemental stacks. We're kind of looking to increase dopamine levels because dopamine can kind of will run through it under really stressful conditions, or if you're running a lot of stimulants, or there's a whole number of ways that you might burn through more dopamine, but it's definitely a nice one to have around. And yeah, I'll leave that for now. We'll now move on to metabolic processes that are behind L-Dopa to getting into our next phases, so that dopamine and 3-O-methyldopa are our two main metabolites. So onto the board. So just across the board here now, we are going to look at the two key metabolic pathways of L-Dopa as its way to its next forms being dopamine and 3-O-methyldopa, and then also look at the process from supplementation orally, how it goes through your body down these metabolic pathways, the levers and stuff that we kind of need to maybe pull or be considerate of, and then all the way to that end goal of the dopamine in your brain. So just before we get into that though, we will take a quick look on the side, just in recognizing that, so L-Dopa, you don't actually need to supplement or get in your food in order to produce. So L-Dopa is naturally synthesized in your cells by the process of hydroxylation. Hydroxylation from our tyrosine. So that it'll be via the enzyme of tyrosine hydroxylase. There's a theme with these enzymes and the process that they're involved as it goes. But yeah, just a key thing is that L-Dopa isn't the only way to get into this dopamine pathway. It's actually probably more popular to supplement with our tyrosine than L-Dopa in the supplemental world. It's just in the case of Parkinson's patients where they more commonly prescribe them with an L-Dopa cocktail. But moving on to our main point of action, we have our first metabolic pathway. So the main metabolic pathway is via the Dopa decarboxylase enzyme. It's commonly referred to as DDC. But then you might have also heard it under the name of amino acid decarboxylase enzyme, which is AADC. So that may be something else that you see in studies. But look, what's great about the Dopa decarboxylase enzyme is that in the decarboxylation, we are getting our goal result of dopamine. You can see our difference in structural formation here. So this is really fantastic. It's the metabolic pathway we're looking for. Naturally, it's responsible for converting about 70% of all L-Dopa into metabolites. But a key point to note is that's not necessarily in the brain, that's in the whole body. So yeah, just something to keep in mind there. In our next metabolic pathway, we're looking at the Catechol-O-methyltransferase pathway. So that's COMT, Catechol-O-methyltransferase. You'll hear it talked about in terms of quite a few supplements, so worth one remembering there. Here we are methylating the L-Dopa, as you can see here, and that is resulting in our end result of 3-O-methyl-Dopa. This is a minor pathway usually, and so it's not a massive player, but we really like, so 3-O-methyl-Dopa isn't doing us value in terms of it's not gonna go to dopamine in any long. So that's the lost brain dopamine. Got to keep that dopamine. So there's also the downsides that 3-O-methyl-Dopa is it's correlative. It's correlated with a lot of oxidative damage and yeah, general cell death and DNA damage in terms of long-term chronic supplementation uses. So that's really that's just the Parkinsons specific, where they're taking extremely large amounts every day. But 3-O-methyl-Dopa is not what we're looking for. We're not looking for this pathway. So to wrap up with how these pathways all play in to the full journey of 3-O-methyl-Dopa from ingestion to goal. So we'll talk. So first of all, for practical reasons, obviously oral ingestion. So that'll be pill or powder down your gullet, makes it to the small intestine. So in the small intestine, we have our first major challenge where you've got a significant quantity of that Dopa decarboxylase enzyme, and you've got a significant quantity of the Catechol-O-methyltransferase. So we don't actually want any metabolism of the L-Dopa going on here, but because the L-Dopa needs to pass through the small intestine wall, and there's a really high amount of it, and of Dopa decarboxylase enzyme in that wall, this
whole, so our peripheral area on the whole, was actually said to be responsible for over half, it's over 50% of all methylation, decarboxylation to dopamine. So it's a massive loss right there, and you really don't want that, because dopamine in your peripheral system has been definitely results in things like nausea and anorexia, like you don't want to eat, and vomiting even. So we don't want that. Ideally, if that could be inhibited, which in the case of Parkinson's, they prescribe carbidopa alongside, which is an inhibitor of dopa decarboxylase. The great part about that is that it does allow more of our L-Dopa to get through these peripheral tissues, small intestine peripheral tissues a lot, and more into the blood-brain barrier. The challenge there is that when you decrease the amount of decarboxylation going on, the COMT pathway, the methylation tends to upregulate. So this is something that's kind of just been looked at more recently with Parkinson's. So there are short-term studies where they actually inhibit COMT, as in Catechol-O-methyltransferase, as well. Short-term studies shows promise. There isn't actually long-term studies out on that yet, so we'll see where that goes. But I really like that idea, because that's decreasing the amount of 3,0-methyl-dopa. And yeah, as far as I've seen, it's not something we're looking for. Moving on, if you address these two challenges, your L-Dopa is able to be transported from our small intestine via a large neutral amino acid transporter system. So that's transported along, and we get to our blood-brain barrier. Right here, to confirm, for the rest of the tissues, there is also a significant amount of both these enzymes, so that is the same challenges around here too. But then once you're at your blood-brain barrier, we also need to transport it through via a large neutral amino acid transporter. There's a bit of a difference though, because over here, this transporter system is hard to saturate. So there's definitely a difference if, say, you ate a lot of food beforehand, or you're taking in a bunch of other large neutral amino acids. But it's less of a concern around this area in terms of not getting the L-Dopa through. It's like the boat is full, sort of what we're talking about. So over here at the blood-brain barrier, it's quite easy to fill up the boat. So I think a big consideration, I would love to see what the supplement formulators talk about this, is that if they're putting in a whole bunch of L-tyrosine, which is common, are they filling up the boat for these transporters? Like, how much L-Dopa actually gets through when they're putting in, say, 100 milligrams of L-Dopa to 1 or 2 grams of L-tyrosine? That's a notable difference in ratio as it is. If we've already lost a large portion of that to all these other blockades, then yeah, we've got, say, just a small fraction, say there's even 30 milligrams there. It's really diminished. So let's assume that it does get through that next transporter stage and it's in your brain. Yeah, we're actually pretty happy as Larry. We've got plenty more of the dopa decarboxylase, and that does convert to dopamine, which makes us happy. That's where we want the dopamine. Got to bear in mind, just to reiterate probably something I should have mentioned more, is that dopamine can't cross the blood-brain barrier. So any dopamine made everywhere else, that's not getting through that line. So it's pretty useless, and it's just going to result in those bad side effects. So the other consideration here is that COMT, Catechol-O-methyltransferase, is still present in this area. What it will do is continue to make that 3-OD. But if you have the right inhibitor, then that might still be blocked. There are actually some inhibitors that don't cross the blood-brain barrier, and so it will actually keep your Dopa decarboxylase still going quite well. So hopefully that kind of paints a picture. It's quite a gauntlet for L-Dopa to get to your brain. It's not a simple process, and I think to get it efficiently there, we really do need to look at the inhibition of multiple pathways. And yeah, I'm just really curious to see. So far, I haven't seen too much of this in the supplement industry in terms of consideration, especially for that that Dopa decarboxylase, which is our main one. But yeah, who sees? Yeah, any supplement industry individuals would love to hear from that side of the story. All right, we'll move on to just a quick wrap up. And yeah, if you have any questions at all, just want to reiterate here is that I'd love to chat. If you've got queries or issues with this, man, love to get into conversation about it. All right.
So I hope that it is actually quite clear from that those pathway descriptions that it is actually quite a challenge to get that L-Dopa from the oral consumption case all the way through your body and into your brain, where you actually want that dopamine going. If you really want it at an efficient rate, which it feels like it's almost necessary because otherwise the side effects are too great, then you do want to have a Dopa decarboxylase inhibitor, as well as if you want to mitigate that oxidative damage from a 3-O-methyldopa, you really want that Catechol-O-methyltransferase inhibitor as well. But that's all on the theoretical side, and most of this is looking, as a note in the Parkinsons cases where the dosage is quite high. So when we're supplementing in normal cases, dosage is much lower, and yeah, it might behave slightly differently, but we definitely know those mechanisms are still there. So say in the Dopa decarboxylase, we know that if you don't have an inhibitor, then around 50%, it was actually more than 50%, would be already metabolized by the intestinal and liver processes. So before it's even getting even close to your blood-brain barrier. If we want to actually caveat that a tiny bit, then you would look at the natural forms of L-Dopa. Particularly popular is the mucuna purins extract, where that natural L-Dopa does seem to pass through those stages a bit easier, so it doesn't get metabolized by the Dopa decarboxylase as easy, and more of it does get to the brain. But you've still got it's not a massive difference. It's still a really big consideration there. So what I'd probably point out as a question for the supplement companies that are formulating is that, are they addressing that issue when they are adding in the L-Dopa? So, is the L-Dopa even worth putting in if we're only going to get about 10% of it to our brain, and then the rest of it is giving us small other side effects, maybe not noticeable side effects at this dosage, but they'll still be actually occurring down there. And then the other thing is that when we're stacking them up with, say, a lot of our tyrosine, as is common, or some other form of amino acid, is the L-Dopa kind of getting pushed out on those large neutral amino acid transport pathways? Because the brain one can reportedly be saturated quite easily. Do we want to make sure that it is well aside from any other amino acids? So, a couple interesting questions there. Would love to hear from the guys that are formulating these to see what they actually consider when putting in the L-Dopa, or usually mucuna purins extract forms. But yeah, that would be really interesting. Hope you kind of learned a bit from this. I wouldn't be scared of supplementing L-Dopa from this. There's a number of interesting insights. It's mainly, bear in mind that a lot of this is from the theoretical side, and we're looking at Parkinson's cases a lot with that really high dosage. A lot of people do seem to manage supplementing with L-Dopa, which is at much lower forms, quite well. So yeah, definitely an interesting one to try. I'm going to be trying it out a bit more at some stage, and maybe playing with those mechanisms of the different inhibitors. All right, catch you next time.